Back in 2005, I spent a number of weeks on Koh Phi Phi Island in Thailand, a few months after the devastating Boxing Day tsunami. I spoke to a number of locals who described the events to me in detail, and as I wandered around town, I noticed a few patches of grass here and there, which were still pasted flat to the earth, and I saw the foundations of a row of tourist shacks that had been swept away by the water. The town was busy and happy and vibrant, and you had to look quite carefully for any evidence of it. The locals described the event in pretty solemn tones, of course, but I was struck by how calm and reflective they were, displaying an almost fatalistic attitude towards the tsunami. Life carried on, and I really admired their strength and resilience. About 6 or 7 years ago, I returned to a game that I'd played and enjoyed at release but had never actually finished, Final Fantasy X. I asked my wife, who was a big fan of Final Fantasy XII, to play it with me. I burned off the undubbed version with Japanese voiceovers, which is the version you're looking at now, and played it on an original PS2 on the little 90s Bang & Olufsen CRT we had in the bedroom. Yes, we're incurable hipsters. And finally, I played it all the way through. The game was released a few years before the tsunami, and replaying it for the first time in about 14 years, it occurred to me that the scene where Sin lays waste to what is essentially a Southeast Asian village, and the character Yuna sends the souls of the dead to the far plane, is quite possibly the single most beautiful, haunting, and powerful sequence in gaming history.
異界送りって何が始まるのさ。
あんた忘れたんじゃなくて本当に知らないって感じね。死者は迷うのよ。死んでしまったのが悲しすぎて自分の死を認めようとしない。もっと生きていたいと願いながらまだ生きている人間を羨む。死者は生きている人間が羨ましい。その気持ちはやがて妬みや憎しみに変わる。そういう死者の心がスピラにとどまると命を憎む魔物となって人を襲う。そんなの悲しいでしょ。だから異界送りをして迷える死者を眠らせてあげるのよ。
それも召喚師の仕事なのか。
The scenario writer of Final Fantasy X, Kazushige Nojima, has described the inspiration for the game. When the Final Fantasy X project had just started, he'd just read several collections of private papers of kamikaze pilots and their families. Amongst them were stories of the pilots' families seeing them off and worrying about their health, even though they knew that the pilots were going to die. That sort of resolve and resignation is what forms the core of Final Fantasy X's story. When I read this comment recently, it made perfect sense to me. This postcard from some strange, beautiful world has an intense, melancholy streak that's apparent right from the opening scenes. Let's just whiz back for a minute. Final Fantasy X was released in 2002 in the UK, and that was a bit of a strange time for a Sega fan like myself. The Dreamcast was recently deceased, and we were seeing Sega games being released for rival consoles for essentially the first time ever. It was a strange time indeed for those of us who grew up in the era of Sonic and Mario and playground fights around who had a SNES and who had a Mega Drive. I still had my Dreamcast at home, and although it was to all intents and purposes dead, inverted commas, I was busy playing the incredible Shenmue 2, an adventure game on a quite gargantuan scale for its time, and one which looked absolutely stunning and smoked most of its contemporaries, despite being developed for hardware weaker than at least the GameCube and the original Xbox. Anyway, I've barely even started and I'm already digressing. I did the unthinkable in 2002 and asked my folks for a PlayStation 2 for my birthday. I got 2 games with it, Pro Evo Soccer, of course, being English, and the epic, technologically groundbreaking Final Fantasy X. When I booted up the game, I was greeted with these awesomely realistic faces looking out over old Zanarkand. In fairness, they were, in my opinion, only on a par with some of those seen in Shenmue 2, but that was a very, very high bar indeed. Even my old man took a strong interest in this pre-rendered intro, and let's be honest, it absolutely smashes ass to this day. Look at this shot of a Toshiro Mifune-inspired samurai dude looking out over a vast futuristic version of Angkor Wat while some mad aquatic sport takes place in a floating sphere of water as a colossal water monster looms in and blows the whole scene to smithereens. This was a spectacle and an imaginative feat far beyond any special effects movies released around this time. In my opinion, it left Star Wars Episode 2 in the dust.
I hate it when he does that.
My wife and I have both travelled fairly extensively through Southeast Asia, and we both absolutely loved our time there, so this game, notable and somewhat unique amongst Final Fantasy games for its East Asian aesthetics, has a big appeal to us. Nojima says the art direction was inspired by Okinawa, actually, which he'd just happened to visit around that time. Tidus's original Japanese name, Tida, and Yuna were also taken from the Okinawan language. Tida meaning sun, and Yuna being both a dialect word meaning from dawn to dusk, and also a local Okinawan name for a type of hibiscus flower which is also used in the design of Yuna's costume. According to character designer Tetsuya Nomura, many elements are inspired by Thailand and the South Pacific, and of course it also incorporates Japanese elements as well. It's a stunningly beautiful game to this day, but what is it really all about? It's a melancholy yet achingly ornate game about the transience and impermanence of things. It's about fathers and sons, a love that isn't meant to be, and it's about veiny-headed weirdos with blue antlers glued to their heads trying to nick your missus. It's all in here, really. One of the strengths of this game, in my opinion, is that it's an open enough experience that it will mean different things to different people. Scenario writer Nojima said that Final Fantasy X is about independence and autonomy. It's about the world of difference that lies between saying to your job or school, "I'm quitting," and then actually doing it and living in that reality. Another theme would be journey. I wanted to cast doubt on the things that everyone takes for granted as normal, the status quo, and then to show, well, after you've had those doubts, what do you do about it? That kind of thing. And I wanted to suggest that everyone has a little bit of Yevon inside of them. Not literally, of course. So what do I think? Well, let me give you my take. Others are available, of course. At its absolute most basic level, Tidus, our main character and window into this world, is essentially a modern, secular Japanese boy dropped into Southeast Asia, or rather a sort of gestalt of old Japan, Okinawa, and Southeast Asia. He discovers and interacts with a landscape and cultural sphere that is alien to him, and yet deeply familiar and intertwined with his own. I don't mean this literally, of course, but in a manner similar to, say, the character of Chihiro in Spirited Away, who gets spirited away to a bathhouse filled with frolicking Japanese gods and goddesses, and gets in touch with her roots, so to speak. Religion is an important aspect of this game. It displays a deep respect for Hinduism, Buddhism, and particularly Shinto religions. The people of Spira actively reject technological or human development. Decadent cities that came to rely on machines to do all the work were destroyed by a being called Sin. No points for guessing what that's a metaphor for. Sin is a gargantuan whale-like beast that threatens the world of Spira. It returns every 10 years in order to maintain a delicate balance in which humans and nature coexist without either dominating the other. It was named by the people of Spira, who believe the beast came into being as punishment for their ancestors relying on Machina and becoming a hedonistic society. By following the teachings of Yevon, the people of Spira believe that one day they will atone for their crimes and sin will vanish. With regards to the Shinto aspect, it is spirit companions and helpers which allow humans to defeat sin every 10 years and give humanity the opportunity to regroup. Within the religion of Shinto, shrines are erected to revere the spirit guardians of an area, and these spirit guardians take the form of common animals such as foxes, cats, and rabbits. Final Fantasy X is a bit different in that the spirit guardians are powerful fantasy creatures, but the effect is similar. Only by paying homage to these creatures is a summoner given the tools he or she needs to defeat sin. The Farplane is another example. The concept of the Farplane seemingly draws inspiration from the Japanese mythology of Yomi, the Japanese word for the underworld. According to Shinto mythology, this is where the dead go to dwell indefinitely. The realm of the dead seems to have geographical continuity with the world of the living, and cannot be thought of as a paradise, nor can it be appropriately described as a hell. Rather, all deceased carry on a shadowy existence in perpetuity, regardless of their behaviour in life. Despite all this, Final Fantasy X presents as being highly critical of the idea of organised religion, as represented within the game by the Church of Yevon. This organisational body is presented as decadent, predatory, manipulative of the faithful, and actively in opposition to expressions of spirituality outside of its narrow doctrines. Aside from all these religious aspects, folks have identified Nietzschean and existentialist themes in terms of Final Fantasy being a story of a journey towards knowledge in which the individual has to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. Then there's the fact that Tidus, despite displaying sentience and agency, is only an illusion himself. These guys might well be right, of course, but to me it speaks more of Buddhism and Taoism. Among other things, the creature Sin seems to represent natural disasters. Japan and Southeast Asia are no stranger to these. However, their relationship, for want of a better word, with them differs somewhat. We see Sin attack Spira numerous times. I think the contrast between Tidus's perspective and that of the people of Spira is quite interesting. Japan is the country that is most affected by natural disasters, mainly due to it being in the Pacific Ring of Fire. 2 out of the 5 most expensive natural disasters in recent history have occurred in Japan in 1995 and 2011. Consequently, it has a long history of battling natural disasters, and it's been able to overcome their impact to some extent. Japan's disaster prevention technology is now amongst the most advanced in the world, and the country has for many years been actively offering technical cooperation for disaster prevention activities in developing countries, as well as providing funds. On the other hand, many developing countries, including some of those in Southeast Asia, suffer from a vicious cycle of low-level development and disaster-related damage, and this makes natural disasters a particularly serious problem for these countries. Based on analysis of the religious causes for the 2004 tsunami, published in Asian Research Service Journal in 2013, it appears that many adherents of 4 major religious groups, Buddhist, Christians, Hindus and Muslims, affected in South and Southeast Asia by the tsunami, interpreted the event as divine punishment. Based on the precepts of karma, Buddhists and Hindus hold the view that the tsunami was the outcome of bad karma in their past lives. It also notes that religious beliefs may hamper external efforts to mitigate a disaster's impact. Was the Japanese tsunami of 2011 viewed in similar terms by the Japanese people? According to the government of Japan in 2018, the majority of Japanese people tended to identify with no religion when asked about their religious beliefs. Shortly after the tsunami, the governor of Tokyo, Shintaro Ishihara, apologized after suggesting that the tsunami that had at that point claimed at least 3,000 lives was quote-unquote divine punishment for the egoism of the Japanese people. Is there a cultural difference between Japan and Southeast Asia in this regard? I think there probably is, actually, but this is a hugely complex and contentious topic, and I'm not going to draw any conclusions. That being said, after arriving in Spira, Tidus is struck by people's somewhat fatalistic attitude towards Sin, and he's appalled when it becomes clear that Yuna is effectively sacrificing her life for the sake of a 10-year period of relative peace known as the Calm. I think the parallels are fairly clear, but as we said earlier, this is very much up to interpretation, and that's one of the strongest aspects of this story. We learn later in the game that 1,000 years ago Yu Yevon was the leader of Zanarkand and a powerful summoner. Zanarkand was at war with Bevel, a strong military power that used mechanical technology to build weapons. Unwilling to let Zanarkand be destroyed, Yu Yevon had the surviving citizens turn themselves into Faith and use them to summon an idealized version of Zanarkand at the peak of its power. Yu Yevon gathered a horde of fireflies and transformed them into an armor for himself, which became the creature Sin. So the real Zanarkand was in fact destroyed 1,000 years ago, and Tidus's Zanarkand is in fact a dream, essentially. So is this some sort of comment on modern Japan? Does the devastation of the Second World War, the atomic bomb, and Japan's post-war role in global affairs chime with Zanarkand's destruction and unnatural longevity in any way? Then there's the fact that Sin is actually Tidus's father. How the hell does that play into all this? Fuck only knows. is my answer, but they're all fascinating questions. The story is a pretty solid ball of tangled threads, and you could argue that things end up getting a little bit overstuffed and muddled ultimately, but it's nonetheless fascinating trying to unravel all this stuff. What is not muddled, however, is the relationship between Yuna and Tidus. Yes, it's cheeseball, although notably less cheeseball if you listen to the Japanese dub, in my opinion. Tidus in particular is much more sympathetic for my money, but regardless, their relationship is beautifully done. It's a fleeting, bittersweet romance, and the closing scene is an absolute monster of a tearjerker. And then there's a relationship of Tidus and his dad. The parent and child themes were added later, according to Nojima. This thread is sustained very consistently by the game right from the opening scenes, and it's resolved brilliantly, in my opinion. When Tidus high-fives his dad as he disappears from existence, having finally gained some approval from him, even though both of their lives were most probably just a dream anyway, is just... yeah. Fathers and sons stuff often gets me like that, to be honest, but it works. I challenge anyone who's played this game to rewatch that ending without welling up just a little bit. The director of the game, Yoshinori Kitase, said this: "We did not imagine how strongly the emotions of the story would reach our fans with the implementation of full 3D graphics and voices for the characters. It was also the first time that I shed tears with my own game during development. At the same time, I had the feeling that games were evolving as a media to tell stories and dramas, so I was not worried at all." The game is flawed, yes, the Cloister of Trials are a pain in the arse. Blitzball is... meh, in my opinion. Some people don't even like the battle system. I think it's absolutely fine, but regardless, these elements of the game are only of instrumental value to the overall experience, in my opinion, so in that sense, all they really have to do is hold up and not make you quit the game or anything. So personally, I don't really care that they're not all that great. Final Fantasy X is one of those rare games that's actually grown in my estimation as I've gotten older. I love the way the game delves into deeply rooted East Asian themes and archetypes and traditions, and does so in such a vibrant, beautiful and endlessly creative way. I would love to see a Western developer do something similar for our own cultural sphere. Maybe one day. There's some pretty damn heavy themes when you think about it, and a lesser game would house such themes in some dark, gritty fantasy world, possibly filled with blood and guts and swearing, not naming any names. But one of the masterstrokes of Final Fantasy X is that these themes exist within a world filled with the joy of nature, a wondrously sunny, bucolic, wistful, and fascinating world. In the words of art director Yasuke Naura, a world of unassuming flowers on the side of the road, birds circling in the sky, and mountains in the distance. Because of its gorgeous, joyful environments and the sincere and endearing relationships of its characters, these darker themes are all the more powerful and affecting when they do surface. What was I left with when this wonderful game wrapped up? Well, aside from a weird urge to grab some hairspray and a bottle of Sun-In, get dressed up like a J-pop boy band member and book myself a room in a hostel on Kosan Road, I was left with a sweet, aching sadness, a sense of the impermanence and intangible nature of things. The world is a dream.
This is お前の物語だ。